unbelievable. And back in 2011, when I heard about this guy named Wim Hof sitting on an iceberg somewhere north of the Arctic Circle, I had been an investigative journalist for about 10 years. My first book was about organ trafficking. My second book was about how meditation and intensive spiritual pursuits can kill you or drive you mad. And I'd been following these charlatan gurus around the world and just finding time and time again, people who are promising you superpowers are liars and charlatans, and they're out there after your money. So when I heard about this guy, he said that you could sit on an iceberg and control your body temperature. He said that you could control your immune system with the power of your mind. And I was like, bullshit. Like, there's no way. And so I got a commission from Playboy, and I flew out there with the intention of debunking this guy, to say, look, you're, promising something which is just too big, and it's pretty likely you're going to get people killed, because who can do that, right? So I flew to Poland, and I had been living in Los Angeles right before this, and before that I'd been living in India. So I am a warm weather guy. I like palm trees, I like beaches, and I hate that stuff that he's sitting on. And so got off at Poland, in a city called Wrocław, and he meets me at the airport gate. And he's this sort of shortish, ruddy-looking guy with a big bulbous nose and a little pointy hat that makes him look like a garden gnome. And I'm like, oh my God, this is going to be the easiest assignment of my life. And he greets me with this, big smile, open-hearted, and he says, I'm so glad you're here. And he's like, and I know you're going to try to ruin me. and at this point, Wim Hof is a nobody, right? It's 2011, January, and he's running this big training program that he was sure was going to fill up. And it was me and two other guys, one guy from Latvia, one guy from Croatia, and they were very excited about him. And I was like, this guy's crazy. So we drive out into the mountains, and we get to this tiny, dilapidated farmhouse in the mountains, and the first thing I see is this dude standing in a snowbank, throwing snow on himself, and there's steam coming off of him. And I'm like, one, that's crazy, and I don't want to do that. And two, how is that possible? Steam? What's going on here? And I sit with Wim that night. And so there's this thing that anthropologists and journalists struggle with, which is if you're going to go report on something, if you're going to go out there and try to understand something, you can do it as an observer and sit on the outside and try to be clinical about it and say, these people are doing this method and it seems very interesting. Or you can jump in. And I'm the sort of guy who jumps in. And even though I think that he's probably a charlatan trying to take advantage of people, I'm still going to give him a fair shot. That's just sort of the rules that I abide by. So the next morning, after hanging out with him for an evening, we start the training process. And we'll get into the training a little bit later, exactly what it entails. But one of the things you do is stand out in the snow. And he's like, it's going to hurt when you stand in the snow. And I'm like, great, that's terrible, because cold is especially bad for me, right? All of you are thinking the same thing. Everyone in this room is thinking, cold's really bad for me personally. And I stood in the snow, first time ever, and I stand in it, and my feet hurt. It feels like I'm walking on coals, because my feet, for the very first time, have felt an environmental experience that they'd never felt before, called vasoconstriction. But his method over the next week does pretty miraculous things. It's really straightforward. There's two things that you do. One is you learn is his breathing method, which is essentially hyperventilation, followed by an exhale, and you hold it. You do that 3 or 4 times. And you hold it first time a minute, second time maybe 2 minutes, maybe the third time you're holding it for 3 minutes. Maybe you get to 5. Maybe you get to 2, and that's all you can do. That's fine. But you're trying to push that gasp reflex back. And there's metabolic reasons for why this works that you can totally read the book for why it does, but surprisingly it works. And not only that, after doing 3 or 4 of these times, he says, hey, do push-ups. Exhale fully. You're super oxygenated now. You've blown off all the CO2 out of your system. Exhale and do push-ups. And at this point, I could do 20 push-ups. I knew that. But I did this, and without breathing, with empty lungs, I did 40 push-ups, and they felt easy. So something was going on here that was really weird. The second thing you do is you get in the snow. You get into that stressful response, like this. And instead of clenching up and shivering, you relax. Because you're programming, all of the things in your body are telling you, clench up, fight this response with everything you have. And that's what we call a sympathetic nervous system response. Your sympathetic nervous system is your fight or flight response. You see a tiger, that's your sympathetic nervous system. You know, not in the zoo, but like in front of you. Okay, that's your sympathetic nervous system firing. That's your adrenaline going crazy, giving you that boost of speed to get eaten by the tiger a little bit later. And what we're doing here is, in the snow, you trigger that same response. But now you're telling yourself, okay, I'm going to switch this response. I'm going to relax. And your body doesn't want to die, right? Your body doesn't say, okay, I'm going to give up on life right now. It's over. What happens is you've denied it the sympathetic way to heat yourself, which is shivering. And now you're switched over to a metabolic program. You're burning fat, literally, and transforming that into heat energy. And it's amazing. You can learn this in like 15 minutes. You can learn this in your shower, believe it or not. And that's, you know, in a way, that's all there is to it. And you can do some pretty cool things. After 6 months of training, doing this constantly every day, and also doing things like running 3 or 4 miles throughout the winter in Denver, so not extremely cold, but here I am just in shorts, I ended up climbing Mount Kilimanjaro in that outfit. That's Wim next to me. So why does this work? Right? What is it behind this that is working? Remember, I'm the guy who says that meditation will kill you, right? I am not the hippie pranas coming from heaven and filling up my chakras dude. Those guys are fine, but that's not my thing. Why is it that I was able to, in just the course of a week, radically transform my interaction with the environment? Well, it turns out there's evolutionary principles. These are not superpowers. These are human powers. Now, our species has been around for, depending on what archaeologists you talk to, between 200,000 and 400,000 years. Now, in that time, our species, that means Homo sapiens, you guys, dealt with extreme variations in heat and cold. It doesn't matter if you're talking in the Sahara, right? Even in the what we consider a hot environment, you're going up to 110 degrees in the day and you're dropping down to 50 degrees at night. And they incidentally didn't have central heating back then, right? They incidentally didn't have air conditioning. What they had was their biology to deal with the changing environmental norms. Now, what has happened only in the last 150 years, 100 years, is that we have taken out that constant of variation in our environment and factored it out. We have become creatures of comfort. We have become totally addicted to the fact that we don't want our bodies to do any work. But that is not what we evolved for. And so what looks like it's crazy is actually just something that we have. We are the descendants of evolutionary winners. And all of this is something that you can activate. And really fascinating is that it doesn't take a lot of time to do. Because we're evolutionary winners, it wasn't like our distant ancestors saw a snowstorm on the horizon and was like, okay, I'll get ready next month, it'll be fine, right? What happens is that these changes to your metabolism are survival-based, and you have to enact them quickly, which is why in 1 week I was able to perform those pretty drastic and amazing feats. Now, there's an entire hidden biology in your body. If you you have about 60,000 miles of tubing. And along that tubing, and there's a lot of biology that I'm not going to be able to get into because we don't have time, but we're just going to look at one. It's called vasoconstriction. Now, when I jumped in that snow, the first thing I felt was pain. And one of the reasons for that pain is that there's these muscles called smooth muscle on all of your arteries, which constrict in a life-threatening situation like cold, and to shunt blood to your core. This is a basic mammalian response. Your cat has this, probably. But you cannot control vasoconstriction consciously, well, at least not very easily. You need that environmental stimulus to trigger that response. And if you've never done it before, you're not actually using your biology. So what we need to think about here is that all of this, the environmental stimulus that come to you is important for human health. Now, we usually think about human health in two ways, right? It's the food you eat and the way your body expends that energy through running or whatever else, right? This is like every diet plan ever, right? How do you get in shape? You eat the right stuff and you do the right things to optimize the way you work. But there's a third pillar of human health that we are just generally not conscious of, which is the environmental stimulus that's coming to you right now. You're all sitting in an air-conditioned room somewhere in Aspen, right? Outside, it's actually sort of sweltering hot. Why do we come to a totally comfortable room where we can wear really whatever we want on the inside and feel comfortable? That comfort is an addiction that we all have and that we've all grown very accustomed to, that is not in any of the indigenous traditions in the world. So I want you to think about that. If you jump into the cold, I said I lost 7 pounds of fat in 7 days. My book is not a diet book. Okay? But it could be. Go tell Oprah. Actually, some of you guys might know Oprah, so please do tell Oprah. So the underground, the main concept in this book isn't just about cold and heat and breathing, right? The real concept here is the environment, and it's a concept that I call the wedge. And this is when we use an environmental stimulus to trigger a predictable reaction in our environment, and then using your intentions, so before you get into that environment, to redirect that response to either a parasympathetic or sympathetic pathway. Now, I know that's a big mouthful of words that I just threw at you, but let me break it down. Let's say you have to sneeze, okay? We can all know what sneezing feels like, right? It's this, and it's sort of like it's painful, it's sort of fun when it actually happens, right? But we know that process. Now, if you say to yourself, I don't want to sneeze, I'm going to stop sneezing right now. You can go like this. You can go, and you can let it go. And that is the essence of the wedge. It's using that response that comes in and then stopping it from happening. Now, this gives you some control over this system in your body that you actually shouldn't have control over. The autonomic nervous system should not be hackable in that way, but it is. And it works not just with a sneeze, because honestly, there's no reason to control sneezing. It's fun, right? But it is something that you can intervene with. And it also works in cold, it works in heat, it works in anything where you have a sensation that comes in from the environment. It could work with delaying an orgasm. You could do it that way. It could work with sleep. And we're going to have some yoga nidra talks a little bit later today. Now, the way I look at it, the wedge breaks in two different ways. And Jamie Wheel is going to be talking about flow a little bit later, so we're going to dive down into that a lot deeper. Now, the wedge is this concept, is where you have this autonomic response and you can choose how to deal with it. And when you jump into a cold shower, let's say, your instinct is to go, and that's grit. That's power, that's force. That is what Americans are really good at. We really love grit. We love that tough guy thing, okay? And you can get some control over your autonomic nervous system when you do this. You're trudging through a desert. Sometimes you need the grit to get through, or else you're going to get killed. But there's this other side, too, where you also have control over your nervous systems, where you relax and you say, instead of fighting that stimulus that's coming from the outside world, I can go with it. I can use it. I can say, this thing that I'm experiencing isn't pain. this thing I'm experiencing is joy. This is fun. And there's this mental switch. And when I ran that cold weather obstacle course race and when other people were in wetsuits and neoprene and out there for hours and hours of time on the field, I was in a bathing suit and I was saying, oh my God, that pain on my skin, that's the sensation of joy. And that transformed for me into the actual metabolic change of heat. And I was also really happy. So, how does this work? Now I'm going to get into, I only have 2 minutes left, so I'm going to give you a very quick primer on how you get information into your system. When I'm feeling cold, that sensation enters my body as volume. It's like this sensation that comes in, but my brain hasn't yet processed it. And it comes in to the lowest areas of the brainstem simply as like sensation, but it doesn't mean anything. And then what happens is that sensation goes from the paralimbic system, where it's just sensation, to the limbic system, where we combine that with an emotional response, where that cold now becomes, pain, oftentimes. And where it makes that symbol, where it defines that happening, is when it creates that symbol out of your emotional state at the time that you are feeling this thing. And the next time you feel that same sensation, your body doesn't reinterpret that stimulus. What it does is it goes back to the symbol that you've created neurologically in your mind and reacts to that because it's sort of lazy. It doesn't want to create the new information. And so with the wedge, what you do is you tell yourself intentionally, right now as I'm entering into this stressful stimulus, I will reinterpret that stimulus in my new emotional state. I will give it a different emotional valence, which gives you amazing resilience. And now this will not make you Superman. You're not going to be able to, you can hike up to the top of Kilimanjaro in a bathing suit, but you cannot be ejected into space. So take that in mind. In the battle of nature versus man, nature always wins. There's a lot more to talk about in this. This also radically changes your immune system. And we don't have time to get into it. But what has happened with the people who are following this method, because they're more environmentally sound, they're also seeing remission in things like Crohn's disease, rheumatoid arthritis. They're managing Parkinson's. And it's truly amazing. I suggest you check out the book. There's a really cool shirtless dude on the front. It's not me. And the other thing you can start doing right now is taking cold showers. Take a cold shower in the morning and relax in it. This is your introduction to your nervous system, and learn from those sensations and interpret that as joy and happiness.